Welcome back to the Smarter Marketer podcast, brought to you by Rocket Agency. I'm your host, James Lawrence. Welcome back to the Smarter Marketer podcast. I'm here today with Andrew Hoyne. Andy, welcome to the pod.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Very, very good to finally get you on. So Andy is the founder and principal of Hoyne, Australia's leading property branding, marketing and place visioning agency. Hoyne celebrated its 30th birthday last year. In its earlier days, Hoyne worked in broader than just property. So working with clients like Esprit, Just Jeans, ANZ, and became really well known when you did the Triple J visual identity back in the day. Over the last 15 years, Hoyne has moved deeply into the property space and has worked with basically a who's who of Australian property: Mirvac, Frasers, Brookfield, Walker, Lendlease, and many more. And he speaks worldwide on property marketing and placemaking, having spoken at South by Southwest, TEDx, AGDA, the International Urban Design Conference, and many more. Andy, welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having me. It's always good to talk about something that you love.
Good, excellent. So I think today you've got so much experience in the Australian marketing industry, more recently in the property space, but prior to that, working with a wider range of brands. I'd like
to be old. I'm trying to convince myself I'm not old.
Well, it's Hoyne's been around for 30 years, which makes, I think you would have been about 9 when you founded the agency back in the day. That's the way I have it.
It's funny to think about, because it doesn't, even though it's 31 years or something, the business has changed so many times. You kind of reinvent yourself, but you've also got to reinvent your business. And so it doesn't feel that old, even though it is quite a long time.
You're still young at heart, Andy.
You mentioned Triple J a moment ago. I was wearing a Triple J t-shirt as like a kind of, one of those kind of old t-shirts you pull out of a cupboard, wearing around the house on the weekend. And one of my kids went, "What's that?"
Oh, no.
And I said, "Do you not recognize this?" She's like, "Why would I?" She goes, "Firstly, I've never seen you wear clothing with a graphic on it ever. And then what's the whole deal with the drum and the 3 sticks?"
There used to be a thing called radio, and this is how we got our cool music back in the day.
I know. I just thought, wow, how things have changed. It's generational, isn't it?
So good. Well, that's a nice segue into the first thing I wanted to discuss. I wanted to, for the benefit of the listeners, just to go back to when you started Hoyne, and just those pivotal moments, the kind of how you started, why you started, and those key kind of moments with clients, and how that journey's kind of progressed.
Yeah, I think I started the same reason that most people do, either because they're just very passionate about a craft as opposed to a business. And in my case, maybe I just didn't think anyone would give me a job.
be tough to be your boss, I reckon, Andy.
I just started doing my own thing, and I didn't really have any thought about specialization. It was any kind of graphic design projects. So it was a lot of cultural projects and fashion and events and festivals and some retail and cafes and whatever. And then, as the years went on, I ended up doing a lot of work in mostly fashion in the 90s. And then in the late 90s, it was very much, I decided I was sick of being broke and getting paid, 10 months late, or not at all in some cases. Unfortunately, the fashion industry isn't the best or the most sophisticated on occasion, even at the kind of pointy sort of designery end. And so I ended up going other extreme and working with lots of banks, superannuation companies, and big business. And it was a very different experience. And from there, I ended up starting to do a lot of work in the alcohol sector. So we did a lot of work with CB and lots of other alcohol businesses, and it was actually quite fun. But I think the big pivot for me came when I decided proactively that I wanted to work in the kind of property and space sector. And I was excited about the idea of developing strategic thinking that actually enabled me to name the project, do the identity, do the full suite of collateral, do the advertising, the digital, design a sales and display suite environment. And, in the last 10 years or even longer now, it's actually having an influence on the built form, the architecture, the landscape, and actually to the point of being involved in what actually gets developed. And so that that kind of journey for me is partly based on, an accumulated knowledge, but it's also probably based on my own personality and going from the beginning of being a bit of a designer / craftsperson to ultimately going, actually, all that matters to me is impacting people's experiences and the way that they live. So, quite a leap, but one that means I look at the work and I think about marketing in a very different way today than I certainly did all those years ago.
Does Hoyne do any work outside of property anymore?
Place and property are the only areas we work in. So for me, it's about deep specialization, and the position that we have is that we know more about the sector than anyone working in marketing. Certainly speaking to people globally, I think that we could probably say that internationally we're quite well renowned as having that area of deep expertise. Probably publishing our series of books, The Place Economy, has probably deepened that position and really kind of cemented our approach in terms of what it takes to make meaningful places that people care about. And so as important as marketing is to me, now I don't really get that excited about a logo or a brochure. It's really about telling stories, taking people on a journey, and developing thinking that shapes built form and shapes experiences.
It's an incredible impact, isn't it, from where you started? With because obviously lots of listeners on the pod, they're not working in property, right? We've got a really diverse audience, but I think it is interesting, the idea of specialization. Like Hoyne has gone from being a generalist creative firm to specializing in a vertical or two verticals, depending on how we cut it up. What are the benefits of engaging with an agency that does, or a partner that does specialize in a particular area with deep expertise?
No one has to educate us on anything. In fact, if anything, I would say that at least half the companies we deal with, we're actually educating them. We know more about the idiosyncrasies of the sector, of what's happening in other markets, of the influences around engaging with community or local council or state government. We understand the funding mechanism. We're really clear about how to go to market and engage different audiences, whether we're selling, leasing, or actually just creating a great place if it's publicly owned and not necessarily selling or leasing. So it's really the whole point of having deep expertise is bringing so much more to the table than merely executing on a brief. It's actually turning up with so much knowledge that you can challenge a brief, you can add value, and you can actually see potential and opportunity before you've even begun the process itself. And I think it's really important that if we don't think a brief is going to deliver the outcome, we need to be really honest and upfront about that. It's not about going through the motions, just ticking the box, sending an invoice and walking away. I think that anyone who really has deep expertise in any area does so because they're passionate about it. They desire to accumulate knowledge and actually share knowledge within their team, but also with their clients and the people they collaborate with. And certainly in our case, I think we share our knowledge quite widely. We're not sort of scared of, so-called competitors knowing what we know, because I think we're so far ahead of the game in terms of the energy, the time, and the commitment that we put into thought leadership.
Because you guys nail that, right? In terms of digitally, you do a good job, but then the book, is it 2 now? 1 or 2 books now?
Yeah, so it's 2 volumes. The third one's just finished.
Yeah.
So the first book was, 410 pages. The second one was 570 pages.
Hardcover.
The third one's close to about 700 pages.
Where will it end, Andy?
They're pretty heavy, I've got to say. I do love going to people's offices and seeing them in the foyers, or going into a CEO's office and seeing it sitting, behind him on his desk. I love the fact that I get contacted by people all around the world who have gotten the book and read it, and it's really influenced the way that they work and the way that they can actually lead their own organizations and think about the value that they are as a business and the impact that they can have by actually changing, their perspective on what's possible.
And I think it is true. Like you're not learning on the job. Your team isn't learning on the job when it takes on a project, right? Because you've seen a similar brief and you've worked on a similar project dozens of times, and it's kind of, the client isn't the guinea pig, right? The client is working with a specialist partner that knows the pitfalls, knows what to look out for, repeatable process, drive it through, right?
Absolutely. And, we're constantly providing really sage advice on a better approach or how to, in most instances, we're very clear about what the client needs to achieve. And yes, sometimes it's sales, other times it's positioning. There are a host of different things that need to be done at different phases of a project. But with that experience, and not just all the work that we've done over the years, but the fact that we speak to people nationally and internationally, we're constantly learning from others and we're passing, that learning on. So for us, it's just the amount of energy that we put into kind of internal education and internal learning is substantial.
You mentioned value previously. I think pretty much all the listeners are engaging with agency partners at some level, varying experience in dealing with creative agencies. We've talked price a lot outside of this pod, and you're a big believer in value-based pricing, right? It's kind of not the labor plus a markup for the output. It's about the value that that you can deliver as an agency for your client. I think really interesting to unpack that for the audience, for the listeners, as to like why would you pay more to work with an agency like Hoyne compared to a more generalist creative agency that might not have the same experience. And I think it would be nice to then talk about pitching and the idea of giving ideas away before money has changed hands, because I think there'd be a lot of people on the call on the pod who just expect that you go out to market and you hit up 10 agencies and you get a bunch of ideas and then you take the one you want. So let's unpack that, Andy. I know you've got some strong views on this.
Yeah, look, I think the amount that you pay is directly correlated to risk. And so when you hire a firm with enormous amounts of experience and knowledge, you decrease your risk. You're not going to waste time. You're just going to get it done and get it done in a way that is more impactful and is actually going to achieve a better outcome. So that comes with a certain professional fee, as opposed to hiring a firm that doesn't have much experience, hasn't done it before. And I've heard people say, "Oh, it's great. We want some fresh ideas," or we want, someone who's not bogged down by knowing too much. I mean, I've heard that a few times from substantial organizations, and it's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it's just, I'd laugh if I didn't cry. And on the occasion that's occurred, pretty much every single time we'll get a call a few months later saying, yeah, it didn't work. Yep. We've now wasted a bunch of money, several months, which in many cases is, more valuable than the money itself, is time. And all they've done is frustrate themselves. The reality is that the way to get things done is to hire the person with the most knowledge, the most experience, who has an understanding of what's possible beyond you yourself. And so, is there a room for generalist agencies? They'll always exist, and there'll always be people who just need a bit of graphic design done. But my firm belief is that it's specialists who actually drive a category, who actually develop innovation, and who actually think around corners. And that's what you need if you're actually going to kind of help your clients achieve great outcomes.
And how does value-based pricing work, like in the property space? What are you kind of pinning commercials to?
Look, it depends on, for us, it's probably about scale sometimes. We can work on a project that might be, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in end value. But we've also worked on quite a lot of projects that are billions of dollars of end value. And so is the work we're doing merely to position a project to sell, Or are we actually creating a long-term place brand which has a host of different needs through that process, from leasing and selling and positioning, and actually building a long-term sort of sustainable place brand that people will come to recognize, that might have ended up getting its own postcode, that possibly will end up being on a map. And so, if you're actually developing some strategy and some thinking that ultimately will become a new township, that's a pretty big commitment, and it's also a big responsibility. And so I think that the fee that you charge, can and should be in line with the level of responsibility that you are taking on your shoulders. It's interesting that in this industry, I think free pitching is quite common. We don't do it. I think it's ludicrous. And I'm also gobsmacked that some of these firms who go out and speak to, a whole host of agencies to get free pitches are often lazy. They're lazy because they're not prepared to do the work and actually, collaborate with a firm to understand what the best approach would be. And they're lazy because they often don't write a very good brief. We see them all the time. We just, get them and decline them. They're also not thinking intelligently about the way they're using their time. They're briefing a whole bunch of people. That takes time. They're giving them X amount of weeks or whatever to develop their thinking or their sort of pull it out of the box idea. And they don't know what they're going to get. So there's risk. I can't tell you how many times we've declined a pitch, and then we've heard from them, a month or two later and said, yeah, we got a bunch of pitches. None of them were very good. All it did was illustrate to us that these guys really don't get it. And so, but some organizations, they're not that sophisticated themselves. And so they wouldn't actually know the difference between, something that's half-baked and something that's brilliant.
Yeah. And I think it's to properly put forward work, you need to understand the problem and go through a process. And typically agencies aren't going to have the knowledge they need to properly execute unless they go through their proven process, right? And so the idea that you are literally putting out work that, you can question whether or not you should be paid for it, which I think you should. But even if you go, well, put a pitch forward, it's likely that you're not properly putting forward work that would demonstrate your ability to do the job, right?
I also think it's a moral issue too. I think, why should people work for free?
Yeah.
Like, we've all got overheads, we pay staff. Why would we work for free?
Yeah.
And, that really poor rationale that ad agencies have been doing it for decades forgets the fact that, yes, they were, because they were making squillions from media buying.
Yeah.
And actually the creative was almost a lost leader. They didn't care. But that's not how the industry works. And whether you're talking about branding or specialist design agencies or, firms like ours who are kind of hybrid marketing brand in a specialist sector, there's nothing to fall back on. And, if firms who think that free pitching is okay don't realize that someone's paying for it. Either the clients are paying, other clients are paying for it. And when I do see firms, like there are firms in this sector who are set up in-house design agencies that have a team that all they do is free pitch. I'm like, wow, how demoralizing. I mean, how depressing to think that every day I go to work, all I'm doing is pitching free ideas. So there's no value placed on the work that I do.
Yeah.
Sometimes they win, sometimes they don't. And even when they do, it gets handed on to somebody else.
Yeah.
So, they're not even getting to bring their idea to life or participate in the development of their thinking. It just doesn't seem very sophisticated, very intelligent to me.
Because I feel in our space, it's pretty common now. We don't engage, right? We don't, anything that comes through, we just say no. Like if you want us to be putting work together, you pay us for it. And you try to build up credibility and expertise and demonstrate that we're really good at the things we do. And if you want us to work for you, you pay us. In the property space, like is it becoming, do you think it's decreasing in kind of prevalence? the idea of pitching beforehand?
I'm probably not the best gauge because we've got such a reputation of not doing it.
Yeah.
Most of the time, those firms bypass us. They don't talk to us, so we don't. And on occasion when they don't realise, and we kind of let them know that we've got a policy that we don't do it. I think we had one today. They called us up. They were quite professional organisation. They seemed like good people, and we just said, no, we'll show our credentials. We'll happily come in and meet you and chat with you, but we won't be doing any free creative.
Yeah.
And they said, oh, okay. Yeah, sure. We're good with that. Now, the other two firms they're going to talk to, they will do free creative. And I feel really bad for them because we're probably going to win the job because they don't have the area, the expertise that we have and the experience. And this specific project that we'll be talking to them about, my God, we've done it so many times and so incredibly successfully too. The runs are on the board and we've learnt so much. There's no way these two other firms would have the slightest idea. And all they'll be doing is putting together some funny name with a logo and a look and feel for a brochure or a website. Who cares?
Which kind of comes back to, the beginning of our conversation around specialization, right? And that depth of expertise that kind of allows you to not pitch, right?
Yeah. And also I just think that, again, with some of these briefs, this predetermined idea, I saw a ridiculous one a few weeks ago. It was like, wanted to know if, the logo would, part of the criteria was the logo must be able to be etched into wood. I thought, is this real? Like, who wrote this thing? And it's not about, the size or the sort of color or the font or the logo. It's actually about understanding the job to be done. Who is the market? How can we engage with them? And rather than thinking about deliverables, because the deliverables should be thought about later, to truly understand what is the problem that we are trying to solve, it might require a completely different set of deliverables.
Yeah. What's the problem? What's the way to get there? Which might lead nicely into the next part of our conversation where I'd like to steer it. You've got lots of experience working with a range of marketing teams, right? Both within your own agency, lots of marketing teams for businesses in property, but also lots outside of. I think really nice for you to share observations around what the best performing marketers and marketing teams, what those traits are. And maybe the first one is how you see the best performing marketers dealing with non-marketers in their business, C-suite, how to bring senior stakeholders along on the journey.
So when marketing people are dealing with others in the organisation, I think it's ideal when they actually don't talk about marketing. You've just got to talk about business goals and pathways to success. You've got to understand how different departments can work together. Again, it's about understanding problems or approaches. Most people who are in non-marketing departments don't care about marketing. They're not that interested. And so rather than trying to make them interested, you're better off kind of understanding what their problems are and perhaps how marketing as a tool could potentially solve problems for them. So for me, I think it's always good to have discussions in a business language rather than in a marketing language.
Yeah, and that's good feedback. I'm jumping ahead here, but the last question that's going to get fired at you, Andy, is what advice would you have for every marketer on the pod today? And that's asked of every guest, and almost to a T, it's kind of something around talk business, talk ROI, talk revenue, and just focus. You can't give up at marketing. You've got to take it through to revenue in the business and solving business problems. So I think it's nice to hear that kind of reiterated. What about dealing with sales teams? Because the property space does have that relationship, and there's always that natural tension. And so, how do you see the best performing marketers dealing with sales teams?
For me, I do see that tension, but rather than accept it, I'm always trying to make sure that there's this really great dynamic between the marketing and sales teams. I very much sort of sit back and let salespeople talk about what they believe is important to them, what their thoughts are, what their ideas are, spill their guts, tell me everything, tell me what you're thinking. And rather than challenge them or push back and say, no, that won't work, I'm probably more inclined just to sort of take it all on board and then ask questions. Treat salespeople like the client. Don't treat them like adversaries. But I always say to them, look, you know what I'm here to do? I'm here to create the best tools for you to be successful. So my standard comment is, I'm going to kick the ball to you and you can kick it in the goal and be a hero. But if you
music to the ears of any sales rep.
Yeah, but it's true. It's like, I want to create tools, be that marketing, whatever, that they're really proud to use. That they go, oh my God, this is just the best work. This is going to help me succeed. And admittedly, in a lot of instances, people I might deal with in sales are very conservative and all they want is just a new version of the last thing they did, which in some instances doesn't work. It isn't the right solution. So I think, I tend to deal with salespeople, lots of engaging, dynamic, intelligent people, but I probably deal with them with kid gloves. I just very softly, very gently know that they've been heard, and also kind of guide them to thinking a bit more broadly, reminding them that actually if we want our marketing to be noticed, it needs to have a point of difference and it can't look like some other favorite thing that they've just seen.
Yeah.
We need to engage people. And so it's not just about, some of the most obvious things they might assume. It's actually about a host of messages across a number of mediums that all contribute to taking prospects on a journey.
I think we had Dean on the pod a few months back, and very similar in terms of building that relationship. And at the end of the day, we're people, and kind of actually, even on a more practical level, actually just meeting and having scheduled meetings and talk what's working, what's not working, what do you need from me? It has a pretty transformative impact. But the second point that you made there, which I think a lot of us as marketers don't think of as much as we should, is that supporting role. Like what is the supporting role that marketing can play once you've even engaged with the prospect? What collateral do you need? How can I help you in that level? And we find that that's the world's changing, and how people sell, even like more of the path to purchase is taken through digital these days, and less maybe face-to-face dealing with representatives of organization. But it is that even once you've built that relationship with someone one-to-one, having collateral and assets, and the marketing kind of doesn't stop once the lead's been handed over.
Yeah, it's a good point. I love doing weekly catch-ups for sales teams, especially if we're in the midst of a job, because I'm really keen to get their feedback on, who are the people registering or buying or engaging, and what questions are they asking, and do we have the answers for them? What are the wild cards? What's happening that none of us thought would occur? And how do we deal with that? Do we actually create some new assets that will make it easier for the salesperson? Do we, rethink our messaging? Sometimes it's quite nice to test a number of different messages and see which ones are resonating, and then dump the ones that aren't. I think testing is really good, and that's definitely done really well when you're talking to the salespeople, because they're talking to the actual end customer. So for me, that's a really important part of the process. It's just, knowing when to ask the question and being really conscious of listening.
It's good. It's good feedback. And then the next one, how do the best marketers engage with agencies? What are the do's? What are the don'ts?
I think in this kind of world we live in, there's a really strong propensity for marketers to put themselves on a master pedestal and look down at the consultant as the servant. So the master-servant relationship is quite common, I think. It's really does not drive a great outcome. I think, when you kind of treat people in that manner, that you're the client, you're the big, powerful client that gets to sign off on invoices or make decisions about who's doing what. In most instances, it's actually not even their money. They're an employee of an organization, engaged to do a role. So I'm always a bit surprised as to why people think that they can act that way. There are heaps of great marketers who are really collaborative. They really kind of take that approach that, while they will make the final decision or they will direct certain approaches, they actually listen, they treat you as the professional that you are, they understand that you've got knowledge and experience that they don't in many instances, and they value that. So, it's like anything good in life. It's a relationship. And so I think the way that people kind of manage that relationship will always determine the quality of work that gets produced. And so, I've worked with some amazing marketing people I've learned so much from, because they know the right questions to ask. And they are really honest when they don't know the answer themselves. And if the agency doesn't, then you just got to go out and find it. So I think when you have that great relationship, which is based on a mutual respect and a collaborative approach, you always end up doing things more innovatively because people aren't afraid to speak. They're not afraid to share a thought or an idea or admit when they don't know something, or suggest doing something out there and in taking a risk. But if we kind of have that traditional master-servant approach, all you're going to get is delivery of the things on your list. There will be no innovation. There will be no risk-taking. It just, it's just keep your head down and get it done and don't get in trouble.
It's such a cliche, but if you want an agency to do the best work, you have to treat them like an extension of your team, like a true partnership. We had Jordan Slover, who runs a performance digital agency in New York and Texas, on last week, and very similar themes coming out of that, right? Which is, at the end of the day, we're people and we're business owners. And if someone isn't kind of playing ball, we'll fulfill the contract and deliver what we contractually are obliged to deliver. But when it's a client who treats you well and is respectful and, knows things aren't always perfect, but, is direct and gives you good feedback, then when you have to go that little bit extra, they're the ones you go the extra mile for, right?
Even more so. I mean, I can't tell you the amount of times that I've been in a situation where I've learned information that could benefit someone out in the market. And I'll go, oh, gee, this company would really be interested in that. I'll pick up the phone and call them. I'll tip people into opportunities, massive deals. I've got nothing out of it, but I've picked up the phone and gone out of my way so many times to help people and to help companies who I've thought deserved it, who I'm really happy to support and see, it's not a brief, it's not part of an active job. I'm not being compensated for it.
Yeah.
And, I've been doing that all my career. Probably more in recent years, those recommendations or those introductions that I've made have resulted in companies making a huge amount of money. I'm talking, this can be millions, tens of millions of dollars.
Where are my hookups, Andy?
And, and it's not like you necessarily go out looking to do that, but when you've been around for a while, things just come past. Yeah. Things will pop onto your radar and you'll think, oh, I could help somebody out with that. But you're only going to do that to people who you respect, who you've worked really well with. And it's not about who are your mates that you have a beer with after work. It's actually not that at all. I mean, you could be someone that you might have nothing in common with, that you wouldn't necessarily go and do something social with, but you just think they're fantastic at what they do and you respect them and you want to see them create success.
Respect is the word there. Other, I guess, observations or advice, traits that the best marketers that you've observed have?
It's funny. I used to get really frustrated when, sort of 20-something marketing managers would speak down to us like they've been doing the job for 2 years. I've been doing it for 31. And it's kind of almost debilitating to get excited about a project when you're not given any kind of respect. So I think that, back to that point, it's interesting that some of the most successful people, some of the most intelligent, are also the most modest. I deal with people who either own major companies, leading big companies, heads of huge marketing teams, and they're just so down to earth. They're easy to talk to. You can have a really open conversation about anything, and they're a real joy to work with. But it's no mistake that they're at the top. They didn't get to the top by being difficult or narky or just antagonistic. They got to the top because they understand how to create great relationships. They always know how to collaborate. They know how to reward people who have helped them and supported them. And I think that, the almost in some way old-fashioned values, rather than sort of climbing over people, that old-fashioned, simple, modest, honest approach will win every time. It might not win overnight, but long-term, it will always win.
And I think that's really interesting because you're working exclusively in property now, right? And property is a tough space. It's a space that does have a reputation of being challenging, right? And having big egos and whatever else. I think if the market is rising to the top in that space, are that quietly confident? I'm sure direct and giving feedback and pushing for results, but doing it in the right way, I would presume.
Yeah, look, there's in every industry, there are lots of pressures, usually time and money. And that's understandable. There can be tight deadlines and everyone's going to kind of work extra hard to resolve a difficult situation. But definitely you'll find it's easier to engage your own team to bend over backwards to help a client who everybody believes in. Yeah. And again, it probably even goes further. It's like we believe in the company and the people, but also the project or the product. Sometimes we see projects and we think, we don't want to work on that. We don't want to put our name to that. We don't, by actually working on it, we're concerned that we're endorsing it. We're actually saying to people, this is a good place to go or live or work or be a part of, when we don't believe that. So for us, we certainly realize that after 31 years that we do have a brand and that does have value. And when we put our name to something, we are endorsing it. So it's important that, we're really conscious that we think in advance about who it is that we're working for, because not everyone's a fit for us.
That's it. I think that is really good. It's a really interesting perspective for listeners because it's the same at Rocket, which is we haven't been around for quite as long, but the team, there's certain clients that the team want to work for, and we work with a more diverse range of verticals than you do. But there's certain products or services that the team are more excited by. And then there's certain clients, based on the personalities of that the team want to work with more. And I think if I was on the other side and I was working client side, I think it might be easy to think that it is all driven by money, and it's not. There's often, we're all human, right? And there's kind of a more diverse range of factors kind of coming together to get the most out of an agency.
Well, I just think, you go home, you speak to your partner or your children or even friends at a barbecue on the weekend. And what do? We talk about work. We're always talking about work, and, we want to talk about it with a sense of joy, with a sense of achievement and accomplishment. And know that the work that we're doing is actually having a positive impact. So, and that's about the specifics of the job itself, but it is also, the kind of legacy of everything that comes with it. It's interesting. One of the things that, when I was working in alcohol, which I really enjoyed, I also thought, oh man, I just feel like I'm just contributing to landfill. It's just, these are just labels on bottles. I really don't feel like they're very important anymore. I used to quite enjoy it from a design point of view. And I do like seeing, engaging brands or just beautiful brands. But, as you evolve in your career and you change your thinking and what's important to you, it's interesting because property on some level might have a negative stigma for some people, but I actually find it incredibly exciting. And I also think that, having the ability to create places where people do live or work, and knowing that we can shape a better outcome, that's a real legacy in itself.
Because the development's being built anyway. So it's do you want it being built in a way that doesn't work, doesn't function, doesn't bring people together, or do you want it to be put together in a way that does all those things that Hoyne works towards, right?
Yeah, it gets completed and people celebrate it. People think, "Oh, it's such a great place. I want to go and have dinner there, or I want to live there, or it's a beautiful kind of piece of architecture, that adds value to a neighborhood."
Andy, thank you so much for coming onto the pod. I'm going to ask you one final question. I gave you a little bit of a teaser there, so you've got no excuse but to nail this. But yeah, what's one piece of advice that you'd give? What's the best piece of marketing advice that you'd give to a young up and coming marketer trying to make their way in Australia?
I would look at the people who, consultants or service providers, experts that work for your company, and I would go and shadow them. I would actually say, "Hey, any chance I could come and work in your office for a day or two?" And they go, "Well, why?" I want to learn. I want to see how you guys operate. I want to see what happens on your side of the fence. I want to see how you guys tackle things. No one does that. But I just think the amount of insight that you would get from it. And now some firms might say, "Oh, look, we can't do it because we've got lots of different confidential client work around that might be a competitor to you." But many would say, "Yeah, great, come along. Like, be a part of what is happening. Don't just brief it and walk away, but actually try and understand it. Try and get hands-on in any way you possibly can, because then you'll truly learn. And then you'll be able to brief better, assess better, understand, the opportunities and the pitfalls." So basically, you've just got to upskill yourself in every way you can.
I love it. That's not an answer that anyone's given, but I think it's excellent advice. That's Andy's thinking. You're always going to come at it from a different angle. Thanks, mate. I really appreciate you coming on, and I hope that all the listeners today have enjoyed having Andy on the Smarter Marketer podcast.
Excellent. Thanks for having me. And just remember, keep investing in those relationships. That's all that matters.